Okay, here we go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for taking some time out of your Saturday morning. This beautiful sunny day, the gorgeous day after the storms. Thank you for joining this launch of this book that has been such a long time in development, 10 years, would you believe? Thank you, Rachel. Very nicely modeled there. Um, 10 years from inception to delivery. It's been a wild ride. I've learned such a lot in this period of time, and I'm really excited to be at this point where I'm able to share these ideas far and wide. And as well as the book, there's also an online course which we'll talk about later on. And this morning we've just launched the free. There's a free taster course with the first 5 chapters of the book are covered in that. So we'll talk about that more later on. Quick bit of housekeeping, and I will introduce my amazing interlocutor for this morning.
Mhm.
So, as you've just seen, those people who joined us before we started the recording, the chat window is not working for some reason, but the Q&A is. So please do answer, post any comments or questions in the Q&A thing, and then after my conversation with Rachel, we will open this up to the floor, and we will unmute people, and we can have a nice chat about this stuff, because this is not a one-way ticket. So yes, it's my great honor. I'm absolutely delighted that Rachel agreed to interview me as part of this launch. Rachel is no stranger to making change stick herself, as the former head teacher of, was it Walthamstow Girls?
Well, Walthamstow School for Girls was a very well-established school when I went there as head, but my last headship was Isaac Newton Academy, which was brand new. I set that up from
That's right.
scratch.
Yes. Yeah. And that was one of those ones that starts with year 7 and builds up throughout, was
Yep,
it?
and with reception and built up to.
Right, yes. And you achieved some phenomenal things at Isaac Newton Academy, I'm well aware. And you're one of the things that many things that I really admire about you is that you've been able to take these ideas around, learning to learn and self-regulated learning, ideas that are actually really hard to implement. And there are many examples of those ideas being not particularly implemented well. And you really made them fly. And so I'm hopeful that this is not just going to be me talking, but I want this to be a conversation, and I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on how to implement change effectively. And I remember asking you about that back in our podcast conversation, which I thoroughly recommend to people to go and check out if you haven't heard that one already. So yes, thank you very much. I'm very honored that you've taken the time to do this for me. So feel free to grill me away.
Over to me, over to
Yeah.
me. Well, James, equally, I was really flattered and honoured to be asked to facilitate the discussion in today's sort of official launch of your book, because you very kindly sent me a proof of the book a few months ago. And when I read it, I was just bowled over by the power of the arguments, but also the practicality and utility of all the tools and techniques that the book is absolutely sort of brimming with. So I highly recommend this book to people who are either live with us today or are able to view this recording after today. And I'm really looking forward to having a discussion and hopefully giving you a platform to share some of those ideas more widely, James. So big congratulations on getting the book published. Having written a few books myself, I know both the joy but also the pain of writing and the sense of relief when you finally give birth to something you've been working on for many months or years. Sometimes I think book gestation is a lot longer than real life gestation. Oh, human gestation. And I know that there are a few authors who are either with us today live or who've logged on to get the recording of this, so they'll recognise that too. Could you just in a few words start off, James, by telling us what's the purpose of the book and what, if you like, is the sort of elevator pitch? What's the book about?
Yes, sure. So the strap line of the book is a practical guide to implementing school improvement, and that does a pretty good job of capturing what it is. It's this practical guide, and it's a book about a program. So making change stick is a program that I've been working with schools developing for really quite intensively for about the last 5 or 6 years or so. And there were two phases to that, really. One was just to read very widely around the literature around change management from lots of different fields. The two main ones are implementation science and improvement science, which are much more established in healthcare, although there is some educational stuff in those fields as well. but also looking at like political science, lots of stuff, lots of amazing books from the world of business and industry and manufacturing, psychology, sociology, behavioral science, and so on. And the change management literature is not often what you might call a page turner. It's often a bit of a slog, very jargon heavy, quite dense, and quite frustrating, like often to read. But there's also some unbelievable nuggets in there. And it was a really thrilling process actually to read all of this stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, this stuff is just wow. Like if we can figure out how to make this happen in schools. And that was the phase two. So then I started to implement these ideas in schools, working with many schools all around the world. And so that's what it is really. It's these tried and tested ideas that have been forged in real world context, so that we have some confidence that they work. And that was a
Yeah.
long elevator ride, I realized, but anyway, that was my pitch.
From ground floor to floor 10 or something.
Yes.
But you're right, the science is quite heavy, and probably for a busy educator a bit impermeable, but you do a brilliant job of synthesizing it and making it so easily digestible. What got you interested in this field, and did the book sort of come from a germ of an idea? And I'm really interested to know, where did it start? Where was the seed started?
Yes, it was pure happenstance. So I was a PhD student, a distance PhD student, and so I was very rarely at my university. But I did happen to be there on one particular day, and I obviously didn't have much going on when there was this conference on called Implementing Implementation Science, and it was 10 years ago, to almost to the day when I submitted the book. So it was July 2014, and the keynote speaker that day was somebody called Barbara Kelly, Dr. Barbara Kelly, who's an educational psychologist based up in Scotland at the University of Strathclyde. And she just gave this amazing keynote. And she was the editor of the implementation science handbook for psychologists in education. And she gave this incredible keynote where she started by saying, implementation science is amazing for two reasons. Number one, like everybody needs it ASAP. And number two, nobody's heard of it. And actually, 10 years later, both of those statements are still true. And that's something that I'm very hopeful that this book will do something to change. And that's the case in healthcare as well as in education. And as the day unfolded and I started to learn more about this field, I remember just scribbling madly away in my pad. And I wrote in double underlined letters, when you finish your PhD, get into implementation science. Like I could just see this was not just something that was going to help me with my PhD, but this is something that education really needs to get a hold of. And that often when you go back from a conference, that piece of paper gets lost. But I don't know exactly what happened. But four years later or so, when my PhD finally was finished, I still had that idea in my mind. I'd got the bug. And by then I was working at UCL, at the Institute of Education, in the Center for Educational Leadership. And I was able to set up a program there. My job was a programs leader, and I created an implementation science program, the very first sort of baby steps on this journey. That was in 2018 with UCL Academy, two amazing school leaders there, Elaine Long and Kate Barry. And that was the beginning of this process.
That's so interesting. As you were telling that story, it was reminding me of how I first got interested in the sort of learning powered approach. And a bit like you, it was just happening to go to a conference and hearing Guy Claxton speak many, many years ago, 20 plus years ago, and just feeling like, the scales dropping from my eyes and realizing this was going to be so vitally important. And I was just about to become the head teacher of Walthamstow Girls. And I thought, when I'm head, I'm going to take that there and implement it. So it's interesting, isn't it, the power that these great educators and orators have over our thinking and our actions. And just over a year ago, we lost somebody who I think for many of us was absolutely the sort of, the godfather of education thought, and totally sort of inspired and led our work and our thinking, Tim Brighouse. And you and I met at his memorial at Westminster Central Hall not that long ago. I understand the title of this new book was actually inspired by Tim. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, that's true. Yes, so that poster, that I think I got that poster at that book launch, and I have this by my desk. So Tim, with this, it's such an amazing image, that isn't it? Look at those eyes. Like, I find it actually quite helpful to have him looking at me. You
It's
can.
lovely. And I have my Be More Tim tea coaster sitting by my desk as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yes, there's some good merch there. Um, and so, yes, I was very, very fortunate to get to know Tim a little bit in recent years. I interviewed him and Mick for their amazing doorstop of a book about our schools. We did a really long podcast about that, where we only covered about 3 of the chapters. And then later on, I interviewed him. We had like a sort of an in conversation with for the first Rethinking Education conference. And yeah, he like, and I went to Northern Rocks sometime around then. I was presenting on implementation science, and it was one of those conferences where I traveled all the way up to Leeds, and it was like a grueling, like 8 hour long drive or something. And about 5 people came to my session because I was up against like Tom Sherrington or something. But two of those people were Mick and Tim. So I
There
was
you
like,
go. Who else do you
okay,
need? Yeah.
that's they're worth about 200 people. And so yeah, and they were very, very complimentary. They could also see what I could see. And they were very supportive, and they were great. And yeah, so in a subsequent conversation with Tim, he said, because at the time I was calling it implementation science for schools, which was just a
No
terrible.
one was going to buy that.
No, no. Like technically it's true, but it's like nobody really knows what implementation science is, and so it doesn't really work as a title. And he just went, call it making change stick, because that's the thing. It's like people can make good things happen, but they just nearly always fizzle out. It's about making it stick. And
Yeah.
Tim was a very gifted linguist, wasn't he? He was brilliant his way with words, and so I accepted his advice with gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very pleased that you called it that. My first solo book was called Obstetrics for Schools, and my husband said to me, "Do not call it that. No one's going to know what on earth it's about." But I ignored him, as I normally do, to my peril. So let's get into talking about the book, James. Right at the outset of the book, you present a really stark statistic, which is a bit sort of mind blowing, and it leads to a question. Tell us what that sort of statistic is all about at the very beginning. It's quite arresting.
Yes, so there are 2 statistics that spring to mind. There's one which is about just like generally in healthcare. There's this statistic around to what extent is evidence-based practice actually happening out in the world, and the research, as far as we can gather, is this alarming statistic that it takes on average about 17 years. So people often talk about the 17-year implementation lag to achieve 14% uptake across the healthcare system as a whole.
Gosh.
And so that was one of the first things that I read when I got the bug, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's they're both bad numbers." The 17 years thing is bad enough, but 14%. And what that means is that the vast majority of treatments that are being administered in hospitals and healthcare centers around the world are suboptimal, despite the evidence being out there that better treatments are available. And this is such an interesting problem. It's not for want of trying. It's like there was a fascinating study where they developed an approach to treating people with bipolar disorder. And I think I talk about this in the book. And they ran it in this big randomized controlled trial in like 10 study centers around the United States, and it had this amazing impact, crazily improved outcomes for no cost or very, very little cost. And it was just like a no-brainer. And then this thing was added to the national guidelines for how to treat bipolar disorder. There was CPD courses, it was published in high profile journals, like everything that you could wish for was done. And then fast forward a year or two, and it's just like crickets. Like nobody's doing this thing. Not even the practitioners who were working
Worked on.
in the healthcare centers where it was trialed and found to be effective. And this problem just replicates over and over again. If you like the evidence on hand washing that became apparent, germ theory like 250 years ago, and it was like almost 100 years before hand washing became widespread in medical practice.
Yeah.
Millions of people died as a consequence, and this problem just replicates again and again and again.
Mm.
Why is it? Why is this problem happening? And implementation science is really about closing that gap when you've got the evidence that something is
Yeah.
effective, how can you scale that up so that it just becomes a part of routine practice in the way that hand washing has done, but many other things haven't? So that was one statistic. Is that the one that you were thinking of?
Well, it wasn't, but that's fascinating, and it reminds me of that amazing play, Dr. Semmelweis, and the way he was bashing his head against a wall, understanding how obstetrics could be made much more safe, and nobody sort of listened to him, just deafening silence. Well, it was more about the statistic about the percentage of school improvement initiatives that actually
Yes.
improve pupil outcomes. That was really depressing too.
Yeah, so I often ask this question, and it's sort of almost quite an innocent question, where you ask, like, what proportion of school improvement initiatives actually improve anything? And it's really low. And whenever you ask that question, there's often sort of interesting non-verbal responses. People often sort of murmur a bit. They know that you've hit something, quite a live issue. And nearly always, whenever I ask this question, people come back with something in the region of 10 to 20%. There's a bit of a range, but it's around 10 to 20%. And if you really push people and you say, I'm talking about improvement initiatives for which you have demonstrable evidence of impact on kids' lives, that you've got some sense of causation, so that you have a sense of what it is that you did or perhaps stopped doing that led to those outcomes. And those things were those gains were sustained over several years, and they're still happening now. At that point, many people sort of revise their figure down to zero, or they maybe point to like one or two things that they say, oh yeah, well, I think, like read write ink seems pretty effective, but actually it's not really working everywhere quite yet, or whatever it might be. And so it's the first chapter of the book. I call it the mind-blowing question. And
Yeah.
I find it mind-blowing, A, because the figure's so low, B, because everybody knows this, and C, because that doesn't seem to stop people from rolling out the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And you get this sort of this condition of like initiative-itis, as Michael
Yeah.
Fullan calls it. I think it was him who coined that term, where people sort of just get jaded and quite skeptical and cynical when the next thing gets rolled out. And I remember that is very widespread, this sort of real like us and them dynamic in schools, where school leaders announce things and the teachers are like passing each other notes and muttering and essentially sort of being a bit subversive, because they know that this probably isn't going to last. And so
So So then you go on to try and explore why this is, don't you? Leaders are expending so much energy and time, and almost, it becomes their sort of primary purpose to want to implement changes. So why does so little of it stick? Why does so little of it lead to improvements in outcomes?
yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think the first thing to say is that it's really hard, like implementing change in schools in a large organization. If you think about just like implementing change in your own life, like trying to read more novels, you seem to be doing quite well on that front, or or maybe you just like buy lots of books and then don't read them.
Exactly. It's just wallpaper.
Or go to the gym. The New Year's resolution syndrome. Strava, the exercise app, did this analysis where they looked at 800 million data points, and it's January the 19th is the day when everybody gives up on their New Year's resolution. And it's funny because January the 20th this year was Blue Monday, the so-called the most depressing day of the year. And I wonder if those things are linked. And so it's hard, like it's really hard to implement change, even when there's just one of you, right? Like n equals one, read more books, and it's hard to sustain that. And so if you're thinking about something as complex as a school, how diverse is a staff room, trying to get sort of everybody to pull in the same direction, people who've got different values, different beliefs. Some people are really into their subject and cognition and subject learning. Some people are really into like holistic stuff and developing the whole child and developing confidence and oracy and all of that. And people, those things really often are quite in contention with one another. And it's like there's a million other issues like that. And so it's hard. But there are two big reasons, I think, that I talk about in chapter 2 of the book. One being that school leaders just aren't taught this stuff. Like we're not taught how to do this. And that's come through loud and clear in the work that I've been doing with schools recently. And I know that partly because I used to teach. I used to deliver the NPQs, the
Mhm.
qualifications that aspiring school leaders do. And under the old system that the vast majority of current school leaders trained under, there was a bit of stuff in there on change management. They would talk about Fullan. They would talk about, the Kubler-Ross like stages of grief and all of that. And it's sort of
Yeah.
useful stuff, but it's not like a granular, guide to how to implement change. And in the new MPQs that came out a few years ago, and I know that they're shortly to be reviewed, um, there's now a section on implementation, but they've basically like copy and pasted the EEF's implementation framework and just
Yeah.
bolted it on almost word for word the same across all of the MPQ frameworks. And there is some good stuff in the EEF guidance and in that EEF framework, but it's quite a high level framework really. And again, it doesn't
Quite broad in general, isn't it?
yeah, and like I say, it's good stuff, but it doesn't. It's not enough. I don't think. I think
Mm.
there are lots of things in this book that are not in that EEF guidance that I think are
Yeah.
really invaluable.
Yeah.
Um, so
I
that
totally
just
agree.
very quickly. So that's reason one. We're not taught this stuff, and the second big reason is top down change. We default to top down. There's a small number of people at the top of the pyramid, not just in education, but in any organization really in society. The president of the United States is a pyramidal structure. So is your local hospital. So is your local gym. Like everything's pyramids everywhere. And sometimes top-down change can be effective when swift, decisive action is called for. But often it really is ineffective when it comes to implementing change on the really difficult problems like closing the disadvantage gap, which I know you're very involved in that work,
Yeah.
or improving literacy outcomes, which are going in the wrong direction big time, or improving mental health and well-being or attendance, or if you think more widely beyond schools, like the social care crisis, climate change, life expectancy is going down for the first time in decades. Very clearly the people at the top of these organizations are not got the answers, or else we
Yeah.
wouldn't be having these ongoing intractable problems. And
Yeah.
so the question is then, like, how can we work in a way that we overcome those problems with top down change?
Yeah. That I agree with that so much. I mean, thinking back to my training, I never had any training on implementation science, apart from a little bit in my MPQH. And I can remember, reading a bit around implementation science at that point, and it really then helping with the initiatives that I was trying to implement in schools. But you're right. I think a lot of the time we are sort of blundering around a little bit, sort of without a clue as to what we're doing or whether it's going to work, because we're not coming from a position of confidence. And as you say, that sort of top-down approach might work in some situations, but if it's the only approach you have to adopt in every situation, it's only ever going to succeed occasionally. I think that EEF implementation guide is the most downloaded EEF document, which would speak to the fact that people really want to be taught how to do this. They know that
Yeah.
they're sort of ignorant and blundering around a little bit, but they don't know where to go. So this book is definitely a great place to go. And the book has a few really big ideas, but perhaps the biggest of them is the idea of the slice team, which addresses your second point, doesn't it, about how to do implementation more effectively. Tell us what a slice team is, because I'd never come across the terminology until I read your book.
Yeah, so this is an idea that I took directly from the implementation science literature, where it goes by a number of different names. It's sometimes called a slice team, a vertical slice team, transformation zone, change team. They go by lots of different ideas. A NIC, a networked community, but essentially you take a cross section through the organization so that you get representatives of different kinds of people sitting around the decision making table together. And so in a school, instead of having the senior leaders make all the decisions, you establish a slice team. Let's say that you're looking at how to improve feedback, say. So you get a slice team. So you get maybe a senior leader on that team, but also a middle leader, so that you're looking at it through that lens. An early career teacher. So you're thinking about this for the rookies. Also, the Senko or Alenko if you're in Wales. Teaching assistants are hugely often in the schools that I've worked with. Teaching assistants often come to play a really, really important role in these teams because they
Because
see.
they see what's going on in the classroom in a way which the teacher just doesn't have the capacity or time to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes kids, parents, governors, site staff, lunchtime supervisors. It depends on the change initiative, but it's all the people who have a relevant perspective on what you're trying to do. And it's not just a consultation exercise, which is often what these things are done as, but this group essentially becomes the executive tasked with overseeing this feedback initiative, and they're equally responsible for contributing to writing a plan and also to implementing that plan. And it's often over like a 2 or 3 year period. So it's not a quick fire thing, because we know that that's how long it takes to implement lasting change in a school. It's the time frame is years rather than weeks and months. And that's not to say that you don't see results straight away. You often do, but you need to have your eye on that longer term. And so that's the big idea that drives this whole approach, really. And
Mm.
it's been amazing how well it's been received. And two things happen when you work with a slice team. Number one is that you just get much better decision making because you're looking at it through all of these different perspectives. You're anticipating problems that the school leaders wouldn't have seen using that top-down approach. They're not thinking about it from the eyes of a classroom assistant or a pupil with SEN or with, whatever it might be, early career teachers. But secondly, it works the other way as well, which is that you get buy-in like never before. Like people throughout the community can see that they are represented on this change team, that there's somebody like them who's going to represent their views and interests, with whom they can interact throughout the change process. And so people come with you on the journey, and it's remarkable the amount of sort of goodwill and latent sort of energy and enthusiasm that people go, oh, this is different. I'm not just being
Yeah.
told what to do. I'm actually being respected and listened to and valued in this process. And they just come with you on the journey, and it just makes your life so much easier when that happens.
Yeah, I think it cuts through and sort of permeates into all the different layers and strata of the school far more effectively and deeply, doesn't it? I think it's worth just sticking with the sort of the mechanics of the slice team for a minute, because when I first started reading about it, my question was, how's this different from a sort of working party or a task group that's put together to explore something? But I think a slice team is fundamentally different, partly for the reason you say, that the responsibility for researching, then action planning, and then sort of leading the outcome is really sits with the slice team, as opposed to a group that's just delegated a task and then asked to report back to the exec or the SLT, and then the responsibility is taken away from them. But also, I think the sort of ground rules and the mechanics for how you set up and establish a slice team are different. And I wonder if you just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, completely. Thank you for asking that. So yes, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that you really want to go out of your way at the outset to flatten the hierarchy, because within the team, like I was just saying, senior leader, middle leader, early career teachers, and what have you, classroom assistants, pupils, there's an implicit hierarchy there. And
Yeah.
like when I started this work, I used to call them vertical slice teams, but actually that just reinforces the hierarchy. It's really unhelpful. So we just call them slice teams. And so you want to go out of your way to make it so that everybody's an equal. And the way that we do that is to, first of all, to gel the team. So we have like sort of, just getting to know each other activities and getting to understand each other's perspectives. And then we come up with a set of ground rules, as you just mentioned, which include things like everybody around this table is an equal. Like regardless of your job title, everybody is equally responsible in this process for contributing to writing this plan and also for implementing it over time. Everybody should feel free to air their honest views without fear of repercussion, because you really want to have like robust conversations when you're having conversations that affect many people's lives. You need to be able to contradict each other. And one of the issues with the top-down model is groupthink. Like so you get this phenomenon where just out of sort of like social awkwardness or politeness, people tend not to contradict their boss, because it's maybe, not a smart career move. It might be just like socially awkward to do it. And so people sort of bite their tongue. But actually, if your boss is saying something, if there's somebody in the room who has evidence to the contrary, you need to have it out, like, or else
Yep.
that's just like going to be a recipe for bad decision making. And so people need to feel free to air their honest views. And we have mechanisms in place where we can allow this. So there's a lovely activity called 5-minute interviews, where, let's say, to go back to that feedback initiative, you come up with a bunch of questions like, what do you think about this feedback initiative? Do you agree that this is a priority for the school at this point in time? What concerns do you have? What questions or ideas do you have? And then each member of the slice team goes away and talks to other people like them throughout the community. So the TA talks to other teaching assistants, middle leaders, and so on. and then they anonymize that feedback, right? So they don't say, "Oh, Bob thinks this is a load of rubbish."
Yeah.
They sort of say, "Oh, people actually think that this may be not a priority for them, that they really need to get on top of something else first, say." Um, and the slice team members can roll their own views in with the feedback that they share back to the team, and so it provides this really nice safe mechanism whereby people can have this honest, robust conversation. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting when you go through this process, and the schools that I work with often say, we're never going to not do this in the future, because you just get a sense of what people are really thinking, and it's like you can just zoom in on the issues. You often get a very quick correction in like what you think, what the
Yeah.
team thinks they're doing. They're like, oh wait, no, this isn't going to fly. We need to reframe this. And so it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, there is. I think that idea of safety is hugely important, and often leaders get criticised for not going out to consultation or not sort of sampling, the mood amongst their staff. But sometimes I think that's harsh criticism. Sometimes I think they are keen to hear that feedback, but they just put the question out, and then there's a deafening silence because people don't feel confident or comfortable to respond if they have something that's sort of constructive criticism. So this is a great way, actually, I think, to support leaders in helping them to get the feedback that they desperately need, but sometimes don't have the tools or the techniques to get.
Yes, absolutely. And so can I ask you at this point, like when we had our chat the other week in preparing for this conversation, I know that you started to use slice teams yourself, and I'd interested to hear about your take on this.
Yeah, so my work now is very much in the arena of helping school leaders and schools to better serve underserved learners. And one of the things that I'm involved in is doing reviews with schools collaboratively to help them to eliminate economic exclusion. So to look at the real cost of the school day and the way in which finances are prohibiting some families and children from getting access to the full range of the curriculum, etc. All ways in which staff who haven't have lived experience of poverty might be using language that is stigmatizing or marginalizing unintentionally, or coming up with initiatives which come from the right place but are actually problematic in terms of inclusivity.
Mm.
And so often after doing an audit, when I'm working with leaders and posing the question to them, how they're going to take the findings forward if they've had a lot of feedback from students or staff or parents that actually there are practices or systems in the school that are difficult and not fully sort of economically inclusive, how are they going to tackle that? The idea of suggesting a slice team where they involve people with lived experience of poverty, whether that's members of staff who might be on lower incomes or who were, previously children at school who are eligible for pupil premium, involving family members, involving pupils from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, so that they're looking at the full sort of range of behaviours and fields in which sort of school operates, but also getting feedback from a really pluralistic set of recipients of education, if you like, is really important. And that's led to some very, very powerful things being aired that probably wouldn't have come out if they'd taken a different approach to trying to implement change.
Mm.
I'm also working with a trust at the moment that's doing a really ambitious piece of work around belonging and exploring what belonging means to them and the extent to which staff, students and parents feel a really deep sense of belonging and attachment to the schools in the trust and the trust. And so we're looking at developing a lexicon, a common language of belonging across the trust. And again, they're adopting that slice team model because they really want to hear feedback from all sectors of the community.
Yeah, that's so important. There's belonging is in the air, isn't it, at the moment? There was that great report that Toby Greeny led on that came out last year, I think, or maybe the year before,
That's
Belonging
right.
Schools. If people haven't seen that, do check it out. And there's also Tina Farr's doing a webinar soon about joy and belonging, and it's coming up in lots of the work that I've been doing in Wales recently, is that kids don't feel sometimes that sense of connection to school, that they don't feel like it's a place that they belong. And yeah, absolutely. And slice teams are a really, really powerful way to do that, because if people feel like they are being taken seriously enough that actually they can not just be listened to, but actually can shape what happens at their school. That's how you deliver belonging, or I think that's at least one important part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Thank you for
And
sharing.
you've over a number of years been using the slice team approach with schools and settings, haven't you?
Yeah.
Would it be a good idea for you just to share one example with us?
Yeah. I've maybe go to the that first school that I worked with UCL Academy, where we did in that pilot study, where they had. Do you remember like checklists were sort of in the air a while ago? There was a book called the Checklist Manifesto.
Yes, Atul
Was it
Gawande.
Atul Gawande? Yeah, and they were used in surgery, and the surgeons
Mm.
at first were like, "We don't need a checklist." It's sort of a bit like belittling, and then they found that they were really helping like massively improve
Yeah, how we remember to take
outcomes.
all the implements out of somebody's heart before we stitch it back up again. Yeah,
Yes, tick, scalpel,
yeah, yeah.
count them back in. Absolutely. And so at the time, I think the school leaders at that school had read this book, and they were like, right, we're going to have a checklist. We're going to sort of make this checklist of everything that teachers should do. This is what, this is how to do feedback. This is how to start a lesson, and so on. And they created this checklist, and they were very excited about it. And we assembled this slice team, and it had middle leaders, Senko, early career teachers, and so on. I remember we did that 5-minute interviews exercise where they all spoke to each other. The ECT, I remember all the ECTs went out for a curry, and they
Wow.
interviewed them all over curry one night. And the feedback came through loud and clear that people really did not like this checklist idea. That it felt like it was just like an impossible to-do list that you're always going to fall short on, and it just sort of felt a bit like a holding up a mirror to yourself, saying like, here are all the things that you're not doing, because you can't do like 50 things every day all the time.
No, no.
And so they very quickly changed it. They sort of kept the format of it, but they started to refer to it as a reflection tool, which is a lot less of a daunting idea, that this is just something that you're going to think about all these different aspects of your practice. Where do you think your strengths lie? Where do you think your areas for improvement are in relation to this particular class at this particular time? And so it became something that really became a part of the beating heart of conversations around teaching and learning at that school, which was it was a nice example, I think, of how very quickly they were like, oh right, yeah, we did that quick correction that, like I mentioned earlier. So
Yeah.
that would be one example, but there are many that I could draw on.
So this must have a massive impact, not only on the likelihood of a change initiative being impactful and successful, but also just on people's well-being and discretionary effort in the school. If they feel this is a school that is serious about listening to them and responding to their feedback, they're going to feel so much more buy-in, aren't they? And in this current climate of recruitment and retention challenges, that's such an important thing for leaders to be getting their heads around.
Completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
I think this is a good time just to pause for a minute and share a couple of the testimonials and really lovely things that have been written about this book. And I know you wouldn't do that because you're far too modest, James, but I've got a copy of the book. I'm one of the lucky early recipients, and there are some really lovely testimonials from a range of the great and the good, and people who absolutely sort of know what they're talking about. I loved Steve Mumby's response to the book, where he talks about the book combining deep insight and understanding of the complexity of change management in school with practical, down-to-earth strategies and processes that school leaders can use. He says it's a fabulous and unique book, and every school leader should have a copy, and I agree with him. I wrote about the book that I think it's packed full of sage advice, practical activities, helpful questions, grids and diagrams, and clear and relevant worked examples. Deborah Kidd, who I think might be on this call today, equally talks about how this book couldn't have come along at a better time for her school. She's the leader of learning and teaching at the British School of Brussels. She says it's really provided a clear and effective pathway for implementing change. It's full of useful tools and important challenges to help leaders and teachers avoid the pitfalls that often lead to initiatives not being sustained. Peps McRae says it's steeped in evidence and packed with practical insight. And just one more, which is directly about the slice team concept. This is from Kulvar Natwal, who says the schools that I lead now have slice teams working through every new project. And finishing perhaps with Anthony Selden, who says, if you read one book this year, this should be the one. It exudes practical wisdom. So a lovely, rich kind of smorgasbord of feedback. And something that all those people have in common is recognizing just the practicality and the utility of the book. And perhaps in no small part, that's because the book is supported by a sort of sister framework and program, isn't it? And perhaps now is a good time for you to tell us a little bit more about that, particularly because so much of that has launched just this morning.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So yes, thank you for sharing those. I've been very, very delighted with the feedback that people have shared. Not just in the start of the book, there's a bunch of quotes from people like the great and the good, like you said, but also lots of people who like the school-based practitioners who've been through the process of working on this. And you know, it's very encouraging. It's lovely to see that. Um, so yes, there's this online course that runs alongside this program, and I'd just like to share this with people briefly. Yes, so the chapters of the book, there's these four initial chapters, the rationale and overview, which sort of present this case as to why it is that we need to change the way that we change, and we've covered lots of this in this conversation already. And then there's three sort of phases of the program itself. There's make a start, where we appoint a slice team, optimize that team, and so on, and you work your way through this process. You draft a comms plan. Do you know what? Like often during this process, there's been like some tools that you come across, some ideas that are really widespread in other fields that are just not at all used really in education, and comms planning is one of them. It's like a staple in politics, in business, in healthcare. And there are lots of schools that are like, yeah, that would be a good idea. We'll use a comms plan. The glass box is about transparency. And then the main bulk of the program is in this middle section, make a plan, where there's all these activities that people work their way through. Excuse me 1 second. And then we move into phase 3, make it happen. Again, the first chapter there is project management. Another thing that's often missing in school leadership. People often don't really know much about project management. And we work our way through to embedding and sustaining these ideas. And now if I hit this image here, we should hopefully see, yes, can you see this, the website?
Yep.
Marvelous. So oh yes, so there's a little pop-up. So if you haven't ordered the book yet, and you want to get your hands on the first 3 chapters, there's a little pop-up in the website where if you fill that out, you can access the first 3 chapters of the book. And the yes, so if you scroll down, I'll go to the try for free section in a minute, but just to sort of show you the site, there's some lovely testimonials there from the amazing Cat Place and others who were part of. We did a Welsh pilot study with lots of leaders in Wales. And there's some of those lovely quotes that you were just talking about. Here are the things that are included in this in the online program that goes with the course. And the reason that I've made this really is that, like with lots of the schools that I've been working with, I've been facilitating this program, and it's quite time consuming. It usually takes around 24 hours. The version of the course as it currently exists, like 8 3-hour sessions, 12 2 hours, something like that, often spread over a period of, say, like, 2 terms. And I need to get out of the way. Like that's a lot of my time, and there are lots of schools out there. And so creating this course, which by the way is the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. Like it's been such a grueling, difficult process to make this thing. You've got to make about a bazillion decisions on all kinds of things. Anyway, yes. So there's a facilitator guide, which I'll show you in a minute. There's a video for each chapter of the book, so that the course is aligned with the book. There's a playbook to help you sort of apply these ideas to your context. There's a bunch of stuff, as you can see. I won't go through all of this. And if you go to the try for free section of the website, there's also a members area for people who pay for the full version. In the try for free section, so these first 4 chapters, that rationale and overview section, are included here. And if you sign up, then it'll take you to a page that looks like this, and this is the program. And so if you go start here, you can download the facilitator guide, which is about a 20-page document, which sort of takes you through these first 5 chapters. And so it takes about 1 hour and 20 minutes. If you're in a group, or if you're doing this with your whole staff, it would be a good thing to do is like a twilight session, or people can just have a rummage around as individuals. There's a bit of sort of housekeeping stuff there. And then, yeah, you can see the facilitator guide here with, which slide to click on, and the video scripts are included in this thing, and there's quiz questions and what have you. And those same quiz questions are also in the online version. So yeah, so there's quiz questions after each thing, and then there's discussion activities and what have you. And so these first 5 chapters are there for free, and then the rest of it is there for schools to have to access the paid version. And there's a scale of fees, so it's cheaper for schools, for smaller schools,
Yeah.
more expensive for larger schools because they get funded per pupil, so that seems
Yeah.
fair. And so yes, that's the online platform.
That's amazing. It's really easy to see how that would have taken gazillions of hours. It's incredibly impressive, James, but also really generous that you can get a good portion of it to trial for free before, I'm sure, yeah, then dipping in and buying the whole thing. And great to have that tool and practical kind of application sitting alongside the book and the theory. So I feel really optimistic about the impact that this book is going to have. But what I suppose are your hopes and dreams for the impact of both the programme and the book? What do you hope will be the change that we see come from it?
So, I mean, like I say, so far the feedback has been really, really positive. And so it does make me feel quite hopeful that this thing is going to really grow legs and become a part of the way in which people implement change. And if you go back to that statistic around, let's say it's 20%, the success rate of change initiatives in schools is 20%, which is
Yeah.
probably generous. That means that 80% of the time and effort that we put into implementing change in schools is essentially wasted, right? It's not actually improving things. And if you think about the scale of that, like there's 30,000 schools in this country, and if you think about, like, let's say a change initiative requires like 10 hours a year to attend some training, to do something different, to report back on it in some way, which it is a very conservative estimate, and you scale that up across the number of schools, it's like millions and millions and millions of hours that are being spent. If you
Yeah.
multiply this across the planet, billions and billions of hours that we're spending every year. Like if you string those hours together, it would be a geological period of time that is just wasted effort and energy. And if we can get to a point where all teachers, leaders, and support staff are trained in these tried and tested ideas that do deliver improved outcomes, the impact that we could potentially see in terms of closing that disadvantage gap, or attendance, or mental health and well-being, or parental engagement, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, if we could dial that success rate up to 50%,
Yeah.
if you multiply that even just to 30%, if you do the numbers, if you do the math, that's an unbelievable step change in improving outcomes for kids and for teachers and adults. And these ideas also, I think, have legs beyond education. I did a
Totally.
TEDx talk a few years ago called "How to Change the World," where I was essentially saying we should have slice politics like this. We should have truly representative slice teams running things, running the world, instead of having this small number of leaders who wreak havoc in all kinds of ways. So world domination is the ultimate goal, of course. But yeah, anything short.
And in a slightly quicker time frame than that statistic you gave us right at the beginning in the health service. Hopefully not having to wait 17 years to see the fruits of your labours.
That would be nice if we can do it in the space of the next electoral cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so who knows? We'll see. But yes, I do think these ideas have got legs far beyond education. But that's just me. Like, I'm bound to think that because I've been steeped in these ideas. It's out of my hands now to some extent. Like, I'm going to continue to promote this, but let's see what the book does in education first, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. And when we were talking the other day, we were sort of reflecting on the fact that often when you write a book, by the time you factor in the sort of time delay for it to come out in print, your thinking has moved on significantly since, and you sort of look back and think, oh, I wish I'd included that in chapter 14, or I would have restructured that part of the book. I suppose one of the lovely things about you having the website and the the framework sitting alongside the book is that you can be constantly tweaking and updating and adding things in. There's a degree of future proofing, isn't there, for your ideas and your work with this
Yeah,
framework that you've set up.
very much so. And I expect that there will be further revisions. Like, one of the things that I've found difficult in this period is that I've been writing about it while also learning about it.
Yeah,
And I didn't really feel like I'd finished growing in my understanding. And
yeah,
actually now I do. And I don't really think there's nothing burning at the moment that I think, oh, I wish I'd put that in the book. Like, I
yeah,
feel like I've actually got to a place where it feels pretty complete.
yeah.
But having said that, I don't doubt that I have a lot more to learn. And there's a link in the book for people to share their feedback, not just on the book, but also to share impact studies. If you've implemented these ideas in your school and it's actually improved things, please get involved. Those case studies are going to be really important as a way to help to spread the word and for people to learn what this looks like in real world contexts, because it's all well and good, a book being on a shelf, but actually
Yeah.
seeing what difference this makes in terms of data, in terms of what people are saying and thinking and feeling. That's really where it's at.
And that's so lovely to hear, the fact that you want people to engage with your work and then to come back and tell you what you might have missed or how you could improve it in the next iteration, and to be part of that sort of ongoing evolution of this sort of making change stick initiative. Just remind us where people can contact you and how they can engage with you. And then I'm going to hand back to you, James, because I know in the last few minutes of our time together, you want to just do a little bit more sort of housekeeping.
Yes, indeed. And also there might be some questions. So while I
Of course,
yes,
there are.
yeah, there might be some questions in the chat. So do you want to have a quick look at those? What is
Yeah.
happy to do? And I'm going to
So
share my
I've got,
screen and do the prize thing.
yeah, I've got Loic here saying, are Slice team members generally picked, or do people go forward and volunteer to take part? What is the process of forming the team usually like? I think you probably addressed that latter point, and there is obviously some guidance on that in the book. But yes, how do people generally put themselves forward or get chosen for a Slice team in your experience? What works
Yeah,
best?
thank you. Great question, Loic. So I really recommend that you advertise the position. You sort of announce this to the staff and you say, right, everybody, we're going to be doing this piece of work around feedback. Say, we're going to be doing this making change stick process. It's fairly time consuming. Just as a heads up, you're going to have to give up a bit of your time after school,
Someone
what
is at
have
the
you,
front door.
to commit to this. But apply, just like putting in an application. And if you feel like you're ready to take on this additional responsibility. And so, yeah, I recommend that there's a sort of like a competitive selection process, essentially, where people apply and you want to appoint people who are ready, willing, and able to take on this additional responsibility. And you want to have a range of views. So you don't just want to have like people who are biddable, who are already sort of on board, and so you've got like a little echo chamber. You ideally want to have some people who are coming to it from a fairly neutral perspective, or perhaps even from a deeply skeptical perspective. As long as they're willing to engage with it in good faith, then that's a good idea. And so ask people to apply. You might need to tap a few people on the shoulder if you think that they would be particularly useful. Your colleagues better than me, but it's really that like the question is like how representative is this of the wide range of different viewpoints and different sort of levels of readiness for change within the school. So I hope that answers that one.
Yeah, that's great, James. And apologies for my electronic doorbell going crazy. Bev Cook asked a question, which is, would you recommend in certain circumstances using an external expert as part of a Slice team? So, for example, bringing in an Ofsted inspector or a mental health practitioner or an ed psych, if it was related to the focus that you were exploring.
That is a super interesting question, and that hasn't come up before. Thank you, Bev. I don't see why not. One thing that I have thought before is that sometimes you could just sort of like bring people in for part of the process, right? So, like, for example, if you were like in a citizens assembly, say, they might have some sort of like expert witnesses who come in early on. So one of the early chapters is about essentially writing a lit review. So like finding out like what all that there is to know, like just like get an expert in to tell us like what do we need to know about feedback, like how this works in practice. And so I think that there's a case for bringing them in for part of the process. Potentially for all of it as well. I'm definitely not opposed to that. I think it's a great idea. I think that you sort of need to look at each case on its merit. But yeah, absolutely. I don't see why not. And I don't think that we should assume that all the answers are in the room, as it were. Sometimes if there's people there, then lean on that for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
great question.
And there's another really interesting question from Dave here about at what stage in a school or organization's evolution you might start implementing slice teams. So he is saying, if you were in a new school where you didn't yet have a large team of people from which to draw a sample, would a slice team work as well? I suppose it depends very much on the initiative, doesn't it? Because if you're in a new school, you're bound to have parents, you're bound to have pupils, you're bound to have some staff. So you probably could put together a slice team, but it would depend on what you're looking to explore and improve.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would work really well in a new school because it's quite a shift in terms of the way of doing things. And when people have got much more of like an established way of working that tends to be sort of hierarchical, it's harder to turn the dial on that because people sort of tend to default to what they're familiar with just out of habit, really. And so I don't see why it wouldn't work in a new school. And I have worked with new schools in which they have adopted this approach and it's worked really well. And like you say, yeah, there's always a bit of a slice. So yeah,
Mm.
don't see
And
why not.
having set up a new school myself, I think there's a danger that when you are establishing a new school, there's so much to sort of design, write, implement in the early years that it's easy to sort of think, oh, we'll wait for a while until things are embedded before we go back and do the review and look at how well things are bedding down. But actually, if you don't get the implementation right to begin with, you then you let things drift at your peril, don't you? They're much harder to then sort of get back on track or rectify or resolve if they're left for too long.
Yes, absolutely. I just saw that Dave did a follow up and said that his question was more about when you're starting a new school in the pre-opening phase where there's not a staff yet. So
Ah,
on.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. I mean, I think that like I still think that it's really helpful to as far as you can, if you're able to recruit people in that pre-opening phase in a voluntary basis, I don't see why that would be a barrier. Like it may be a bit more difficult to recruit people, but I think it
Yeah.
should, I imagine that, it's like in setting up a school, it's not just one person doing that. But like to what extent is it often, um, just put on that one person to really sort of establish their strong vision for the school. It's essentially like a sociocratic decision like approach to decision making, which could
Yeah.
be written into the DNA of that school from the outset.
Yeah, apologies, Dave. I misunderstood. That reminds me of the conversation we were having, James, where you said that sometimes you're surprised that schools adopt slice teams so readily because you thought sort of that heads and leaders might feel a little bit sort of nervous about relinquishing the power or the authority to a slice team. And I said to you quite the opposite. I thought actually it's a really supportive structure for a head teacher because headship can feel quite lonely. And if you are, in Dave's position, setting up a school and feeling like you haven't got a lot of people to sort of bounce ideas or test things on, that's quite a lonely and perilous position to be in.
Yeah, that was so interesting to hear you talking about that, Rachel. That like yeah, like it was a concern of mine. I had two big concerns when I started to roll this out. One was that school leaders wouldn't want to devolve that power that they have in their job description to like devolve that and kick it out to a slice team because they sort of want to have the levers to themselves sort of
Mm,
thing. And actually I've really not encountered that at all. I think that was just a false assumption on my part. People
yeah.
I've not had that problem. Maybe there are people out there who would feel like that, but I've not come across them yet. And the other
Yeah.
one was about the amount of time, because time is in such short supply, and 24 hours is a big chunk of it. But again, like when people can see, like their eyes light up and they go, we'll make the time for this to happen because we can see that this is just what the direction we need to go in. And so
Yeah.
there's a lovely quote in those testimonial videos on the website of Sarah O'Kelly, to school in Carmarthenshire, Queen Elizabeth High School, saying like at first it looks really big and really daunting, but actually it just guides you through everything that you need to know. And then she says, we're going to do this with everything that we implement from now on because we can see
Yeah.
it's so successful. So
So then
those fears have been allayed.
that's great. There's a sort of reflection from Derry Hannon here. Do slice teams have parallels with citizens' juries or sociocracy in Dutch democratic schools.
Yeah.
I'm sure will know more about that than I do. And I think hard for my 20% proposal, which is gaining some traction.
Yeah, so that's Derry's 20% proposal is to suggest that 20% of curriculum time, 1 day a week roughly, is given over to self-directed learning. And I go further than that, and I think I back Derry's proposal, but also I think a further 20% should be about interdisciplinary learning, and then we can have 60% for subject disciplines.
That
So
sounds
yeah,
amazing.
so citizens juries, I don't know a massive amount about them, but in my experience, they tend not to have teeth, so they sort of they often do really interesting work, and there's been some really good examples of them working and changing things, like in Ireland and the abortion law that was changed through that approach. But often they make really good recommendations, which are then just roundly ignored. I think it is more of a sociocratic thing. It's like sociocratic circles, like a circle-based approach to decision making. That's fundamentally what it is, I think. So yeah, I do think that there's strong parallels there.
And I think that leads us really nicely to the last question, which is Zoe's. So she says, imagine world domination has been achieved, and it's been less than 17 years in doing it. There's now a systemic improvement and implementation process established across the education landscape. Wouldn't that be wonderful? What will learners say they feel about their learning in this exciting new world? I think that's a lovely question to ask to finish on.
It's such an amazing question to ask, and I'm actually going to throw it back to the group, and I'd love to see, like, can people just, because there's an activity in the book, in the book, the first chapter, when we get into the program itself, in the making a plan, is called Map the Journey, where we start with, like, imagine a utopian vision of the future where you've absolutely nailed this, like, this couldn't have gone better 2 or 3 years down the line. What would the children say, think, and feel in this imagined future? What would parents say, think, and feel? What would teachers and colleagues and visiting adults and so on say, think, and feel in this utopian vision of the future? It's a lovely thought to entertain. I don't want to presuppose that I know what that would look like at the moment. It's a bit of a, I feel like I would have to take some time to think about it. There is now an established systematic improvement process across the education landscape. Um, what would learners say they feel? I suppose it would depend on whatever the thing was, right? Like, is this being used to implement, Derry's reform, right, where they've now got much more time given to self-directed learning? What would that feel like? What would it feel like if they feel a greater sense of belonging? If those inequities that Rachel was talking about have been closed? It's a spine-tingling question. I really feel like I want to go away and give it some further thought.
And also, if we were doing this really intentionally and effectively in schools, we would hope that we would also be being very metacognitive about it and teaching learners, children, about implementation science. So they'd be leaving school as well equipped and confident implementers of change themselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. One of the other things that the Slice team does is that it really builds capacity within your organization for people who get this stuff. And what I've found, I wrote a blog a few weeks ago saying, like, the changes that I've found happening in my own life as a result of writing about organizational change. I found that in terms of my own personal development, I've finally started to nail things that I've been wrestling with for years around, basically habits around exercise, diet, sleep, meditation, what have you. I feel like I'm not a finished product, far from it, but I feel like I've come a lot further down the road as a result of learning about these tools. And so yeah, I think I say it's somewhere along, I don't know, in the program, I think that you might learn something about self-improvement along the way. And so
Wonderful.
yeah,
Thanks, Zoe, for that last question.
yeah, great question.
Handing back to you, James. That's been such an interesting conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Rachel, for taking the time. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And thank you all for your fantastic questions. I'm very happy to stay on. I know we've slightly overrun, apologies for that. But I'm very happy to stay on the call, and I can unmute people and we can stay and hang out and have a chat if anybody wants to afterwards. But all that remains is that I need to announce the prize winners. So there's for people who have attended this launch, there are 3 levels of prizes which I can now share with you. So there's 3 tiers of prizes. There are 5 signed copies of the book, and I'll be emailing all of the people later today to follow up with this. There's 1 hour implementation coaching session for your school, and the star prize is a 3-year membership to the online training suite, which I talked about earlier, which is worth potentially like lots of money. Like, you know, it's not that cheap for schools. For a very large school over a 3-year period, it would be worth, you know, in the low thousands. So that's the star prize. So I'm going to do a little drum roll. The signed book. We have winners: Andy Brown, Dawn Cretney, Derry, who we've just heard from, Louise Astbury, and Phil Avery. So a signed copy of the book will be winging its way to you shortly. The implementation coaching session will be won by Antonius Berghuis. I'm going to assume that that's how you pronounce that name. Congratulations, Antonius. I hope you will take me up on that offer, and I look forward to speaking at some point soon. And the 3-year membership, and I do believe that this person's on the call. I think I saw their name earlier. I don't know if they've left yet. Let's have a little further drum roll for Alison McGrandles. So your school has won a 3-year membership, and as a caveat to that, Alison, can I add that it isn't quite ready yet? So the online the free stuff, the try it free stuff, I uploaded, but we're still working. The minions inside Making Change Stick Towers are beavering away, and we're hoping to get it up in the next few weeks. But it's like I said, it's full on trying to make that process into reality. So congratulations to all the winners. Thank you all so much for attending this launch and for sticking around. And if you would like to chat, I'm not sure if is there a way that I can just like release everybody so that we can all I don't really know. I think I just need to click allow to talk to each of the people. Please feel free to leave if you wish to. But if you would like to stick around and have a chat, then let's do that. And I think I've now allowed everybody to talk. If you want to have a chat, please feel free to turn your camera and mic on. Oh my goodness, Anne just said she's already up to page 86. That's impressive because it only landed on your doorstep yesterday. That's very flattering. That's lovely to hear. Thank you for that, Anne. Anne does some absolutely wonderful work for Carmarthenshire local authority with whom I've been working recently. So thanks for that, Anne. Okay, I'm just going to stay here for a while. If anybody wants to chat, please feel free. If not, thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you again soon.